Hi everyone, Helen here with you today from Sunflower Cottage Crochet, and today's tutorial is going to be on the even berry stitch, which you can see here. Now it doesn't have a lot of drape to it, so it may not necessarily be great for summer tops and such. A little bit might go a long way, but it would certainly make beautiful embellishments on bags or you know, thick afghans for the winter. It is a really sturdy stitch, really pretty. Now the key to this is always going to be your tension with the even berry. You can see here, for instance, I've deliberately left my tension a little bit uneven, so you can see that occasionally if your tension's not right, some of the loops aren't quite as tight as what you would hope. You'd hope it looked like that and didn't move a lot. But to be fair, it is quite hard to do that, and it does take practice to get it right. But as long as your stitch count's correct, it'll look great either way. So shall we just dive in and I'll show you how to do the even berry. So what you need to start with is just a chain row of even numbers. So I'm going to chain 12, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So there's my chain 12. Now you miss the first chain from the hook, so you don't count the one on the hook, you miss the first one, and we're going to single crochet into each chain going down. So I'm just going to do that. I'm assuming that you guys know how to do a single crochet, given that the even berry stitch isn't exactly what I would be encouraging a complete and utter beginner to do. Almost there. Right, so we've got to the end of our chain there. So there's our first row sorted. Sorry, just come out a little bit, so you can see a little bit more of what I'm doing there. So then what we do is we chain one and we turn. Now that chain one is going to count as a slip stitch for this particular row. Now when you work the berry stitch, you work it this way up, but the texture will actually pop up on the other side. So there's definitely a right and a wrong side to this. If I just get my sample for you, you can see there's the texture on this side, but when we turn over, it's fairly flat. I know it looks like there's a lot of texture there, but there we go. It is quite flat, whereas the berry side has a lot of texture. So we've chained one, that counts as a stitch, so that counts as this stitch. In the next stitch we need to start doing the berry stitch. So to do the berry stitch, wrap your yarn around your hook, insert it into the stitch, wrap your yarn and pull it through. So now you have 3 loops on your hook. Wrap your yarn, insert it into that same stitch, wrap your yarn and pull it through. So now you have 5 loops on your hook. Wrap your yarn and pull through all 5 loops and chain 1, and that's your first berry completed. I don't know if you can see that very well at the moment. And then in the next stitch we slip stitch. So with slip stitches, remember, try to keep your tension fairly tight, fairly loose, because we will be working into that stitch, that slip stitch, when we come back round on the next row. So then we're back to our berry stitch in the next stitch. So wrap your yarn, insert it into the next stitch, wrap your yarn and pull it through, 3 loops in your hook. Wrap your yarn, insert it into the same stitch, wrap your yarn, pull it through, so now we have 5 loops on our hook. Wrap your yarn and pull through all 5 loops and chain 1. And then in the next stitch we just simply slip stitch, but remember, try and keep a fairly loose tension for that one. And then berry stitch. Wrap your yarn, insert it into the next stitch, wrap your yarn, pull it through, wrap your yarn, insert it into that same stitch that you're working in, wrap your yarn and pull it through, so now you have your 5 loops on your hook. Wrap your yarn and pull through all 5 loops, chain 1, and then loose tension, slip stitch into the next stitch, and we'll berry stitch into the next stitch. So wrap your yarn, insert it into the next stitch, wrap your yarn and pull it through, 3 loops on your hook. Wrap your yarn, insert it into that same stitch, wrap your yarn and pull through, so now you have 5 loops on your hook. Wrap your yarn and pull through all 5 loops and chain 1, and then slip stitch into the next stitch, and then we're on to our final berry stitch and slip stitch. So we'll berry stitch into the next stitch, and slip stitch into that last one, and then we'll chain 1 and turn, and you can see there that our berries are definitely starting to pop. So that chain 1 will count as our first single crochet. So then at the top of your berry stitch, so not this one but the bigger one of the two, we need to just slip stitch. So insert your hook, pull through and pull through the one on your hook, and then we need to single crochet into the slip stitch between the berries, and slip stitch into that top stitch of the berry stitch, and single crochet into that next slip stitch, slip stitch in the top of the berry stitch, and single crochet into that next slip stitch, slip stitch into the top of the next berry stitch, and single crochet into that next slip stitch, and then final time at the end of this row, slip stitch into the top of the berry, and don't forget to single crochet right in that turn and chain 1 which counted as our slip stitch to start the previous row. So that is our 2 row repeat, and we're going to be repeating that again. So if we chain 1 and turn, that chain 1 now counts as our slip stitch. So we'll miss this first chain, and in this second chain we need to do our berry stitch. So wrap your yarn, insert it into the stitch, wrap your yarn, pull through, 3 loops on your hook, wrap your yarn, insert it into that same stitch, wrap your yarn and pull through, so now you have 5 loops on your hook, wrap your yarn and pull through all 5 and chain, and then slip stitch into that next stitch, remembering to keep your slip stitches fairly loose so that you can work into them, and then berry stitch in the next stitch. So we'll wrap our yarn, insert it into the next stitch, wrap our yarn and pull through, 3 loops on our hook, wrap our yarn, insert it into the same stitch, wrap our yarn and pull through, 5 loops on our hook, wrap our yarn and pull through all 5 and chain 1, and then we'll slip stitch in the next stitch, and we'll follow that all the way across. So the next stitch is our berry stitch, and don't forget to chain 1 just to lock that berry stitch in place, and then slip stitch in the next stitch. Then we'll berry stitch, and then we'll slip stitch and berry stitch. And don't forget that you will always have a stitch before and after, at the beginning and end of the row, that is either a slip stitch or a single crochet, depending on which row you're on. So we need to finish this row with a slip stitch, chain 1, turn. That chain 1 will count as our single crochet. So you can see the berries are sitting on top of each other. Now if your berries start to go off, you've done something wrong, but because this is a 2-row repeat and the berries are quite prominent, you'll see straight off if something isn't quite right, so there won't be too much frogging involved there for you. So we've got our chain 1, which counts as our single crochet. We need to slip stitch into the top of that berry stitch and single crochet into that slip stitch. Slip stitch into the top of the berry stitch, single crochet into the slip stitch, slip stitch into the top of the berry stitch, and single crochet into that slip stitch from the previous row. And you do that all the way along. And remember, we need to end with a single crochet in that chain 1 turn and chain, and then we'll chain 1 and start again. So that chain 1 will count as a slip stitch, miss the first stitch and berry stitch in the second stitch. Now I'm not going to run through these stitches with you, I'm just busy talking. I'm not going to run through how to do these stitches with you again. It was really just a reminder how the rows start. Just remember, keep that tension fairly loose for your slip stitches, otherwise you'll find them difficult to work in on the next row. And it is as simple as that 2-row repeat. So we're alternating on this particular row between berry stitch and loose tension slip stitch, and on the next row, if you bear with me just a second, almost there. So the next row we alternate between single crochets on top of those slip stitches and slip stitches on top of the berry stitch. So that chain 1 always counts either as a slip stitch or a single crochet at the beginning of every row. So we've got that. We'll slip stitch in the top of the berry stitch and we'll single crochet, that one's a little bit tight, into the top of that slip stitch, slip stitch into the top of the berry stitch and single crochet into that next slip stitch. And we'll do that all the way along, and you'll repeat those 2 rows to get this rather wonderful texture. Now we have used this particular stitch in our sampler afghan, so please feel free to download that and have a go. We do have tutorials for pretty much every stitch that's in that afghan, so there is the help there available for you, and there is also alternatives within that for the more complicated stitch, such as the Celtic weave. There's an alternative in there for that as well. We do hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial today. Please feel free to subscribe to our channel. there'll be a little screenshot at the end that tells you all the places that you can find us, and we do hope that you do come and join us again on one of our platforms. Take care guys, happy hooking, bye.